Welcome to the Investing Mastermind podcast. My name is Signe Lundhold.
And I'm Michelle Markey.
Today, we're going to give you some inspiration for your stock wish list because we're going to talk about what super investors are buying and how you can find that information, because it is actually possible to find out what billionaires like Warren Buffett and Ray Dalio and other fund managers like Li Lu, Charlie Munger, what they are buying. There's ways to find out, and we're going to share that with you today so you can get some inspiration. So fund managers with more than 100 million under management, they must report to the SEC, the governing body in America, which positions they hold, which stocks they're buying and selling. And this is done through what is called 13F reports. And the most recent report came out recently. And of course, on that day, Michelle and I went immediately to check out what some of our favorite super investors bought, because it is not only inspiration for our wish list, but also an indicator of where the world is going. The reports comes out on a quarterly basis, and I personally have a reminder on my phone so that I remember to check what's being bought and sold and what these super investors are buying. How do you remember, Michelle? Do you have an alarm, or do you just know when these reports are coming out?
Well, these super investors have up to 45 days after the end of a quarter to release this information on the 13F filing. That's also available on the Securities Exchange Commission, SEC, like Sina said, EDGAR website. I don't know what EDGAR stands for, but you can do a search for a lot of well-known super investors, some of whom are billionaires and some of whom are just millionaires, and they might manage a lot of money, but they are available up to 45 days after the end of a calendar quarter. So let's say the first quarter ended March, and the 13F for this first quarter this year came out usually around mid-May for most of these super investors. Some of them don't care and they just release it immediately. Like one of my favorites, Charlie Munger, where the Daily Journal Corporation's 13F filing is usually out a few days after the end of the quarter, or this year was in the beginning of April. So that was really nice to know because we can get a quick sneak peek at what some of the best investors are staying invested in or buying new and also selling. And like Sina said, it gives us clues about the state of investing throughout the world. And it can give you not only inspiration, but potential investment ideas as to maybe you know a lot about certain subjects and you think that's also a good stock that you might like to own. It's not to say that you should blindly copy what these super investors are invested in, because you don't know if they buy it in one quarter. Like let's say they bought it on March 31 and then they sold it on April 1st. You have no idea if they did that. So you don't want to just copy it without doing your own homework when it comes to what these super investors own. But it definitely is a very good food for thought. And I just usually check around the middle of when it's supposed to come out. So I know the 45 days is about mid-May. So that I just kind of know, all right, about 45 days out, I'll go to Dataroma or Whale Wisdom and look for these 13F filings usually.
I really like what you just said about don't just go into the same stock as these super investors have invested in, because they could be selling immediately. Because I actually learned it the hard way like that. I thought, okay, let's just do whatever Buffett is doing. And I bought shares in a company that he just bought without doing my due diligence, without using my checklist that we talked about in some previous shows. I just followed Warren Buffett into a stock, and then it turned out it wasn't even him that invested in it. It was one of their fund managers in Berkshire Hathaway. And that's, an important point is that it's not filed under Buffett. It's filed under Berkshire Hathaway, like you mentioned with Charlie Munger. It's Daily Journal, Li Lu, Himalaya Capital, etc., etc. So it wasn't even Buffett that invested in this business. I invested in it, and then in that time, Buffett sold and just closed the whole position. He did not think it was a good idea to invest in that business. He came out and said that. So there I was, learning richer, I would say, because I was definitely not richer from a money point of view, when he exited, the stock really fell. And that's why it is so important. Do not just follow these investors. Monish Pabrai, who is also a Buffett-style investor, he started this copying strategy. That's how he started many years ago, where he simply just copied Buffett's investment. And he speaks about that in the Dando Investor, which is his book. And he could probably do that many years ago because Buffett had another style back then or whatever, but he did it quite successfully. And maybe he just followed all the trades and I just followed one and learned the hard way. I don't know, but I definitely recommend that listeners just put it on their wish list. So go and check the 13F filings. What did Berkshire Hathaway buy? And then put it on a piece of paper and start studying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did something similar to you, although I didn't go too much into a stock that I didn't know that much about. When Berkshire Hathaway was buying Taiwan Semiconductor in, I think, around the third quarter or fourth quarter of 2022, I started paying attention to that and kind of thinking, what is Berkshire seeing? And a lot of semiconductor stocks were kind of bottoming toward the end of last year. So there was maybe a lot of opportunity there, and maybe their only intention was to make a quick buck. That could have been it. Maybe they bought in at 60 and sold at 75, and that was good enough for them to make a quick profit. But also, we have to be careful when we assume that certain super investors are buying it. Like, I think that stock may have been attributed to maybe Buffett or maybe someone else, but we can't just assume it's only Buffett who really believes in the stock. Maybe he did believe in it, but maybe something
He did
changed
actually
his
talk
mind.
about it. Yeah, he did talk about it in the annual meeting. He said, actually, it's a great business. It's a wonderful business. We met with management. They're wonderful. But the macroeconomic landscape, and especially, well, maybe not the macroeconomic, but what is happening in that region, and specifically with China's plans about Taiwan, where TSM is located, he was not comfortable with that. But he did encourage Taiwan Semiconductor to actually continue building businesses in the United States. And right now they're building a facility in the United States, which probably would make Buffett more comfortable and maybe would reinvest in the stock once that facility is up and running. Who knows? But he actually did like the company and spoke very fondly of it. It was just because of the local tension that he wasn't comfortable about the stock.
Yeah, and those geopolitical tensions are definitely a concern, but you as an individual investor have to decide, there are always risks with investing, and the main risk you have if you invest in anything is that you could lose all of your money. Like, whatever your capital was that you put in could go to zero. Like, if you had invested in Credit Suisse many years ago and then kind of watched it go down to below $1 per share, like, your investment in a stock like that is basically gone. Or First Republic Bank, that one is actually gone because
Yeah.
it was, taken over by JP Morgan Chase. So some
Mike
of
Burry
these,
lost money on that one.
yeah, for sure. I saw that he put like a $2 million bet, which you could also see on his 13F filing for Scion Asset Management. And he bought a bunch of bank stocks. So some of them pay off, some of them you might lose. So it's not to say that investing is gambling, but it can be gambling if you don't know what you're doing. So that's why it's important to really study and not just guess, not just be like, oh, I like this bank because I'm a customer there. Like, that's not enough of a reason to invest in certain stocks. Like, you really have to dig deeper and understand like the financial reports, including the company's 10K annual reports or 10Q quarterly reports, and any other learning material you can get your hands on, like the shareholder quarterly calls or annual meetings, things that you could tune into to really study something before you commit to putting your hard-earned money into any given stock. And so with some of that, like, I only bought one share of TSM, but then I sold it not too long after for basically the same of what I paid for it, because I actually sold it before I even knew that Berkshire Hathaway entirely sold out of TSM based on the latest 13F filing. So the amazing thing is Berkshire had put $4 billion into it, I think, at one point. And then it went down to 600 million at the end of the fourth quarter. And then now at the end of the first quarter, now we see it's entirely sold off. So it just goes to show you, you have to be really sure and not just be like, oh, if Buffett thinks it's good, I think it's good. You have to like think for yourself, think independently, and not just blindly follow someone else. So Monish Pabrai talked about that. Like, you can be a shameless cloner, but you have to be intelligent about it. Like in Dondo, he's not just saying be a blind shameless cloner, but be smart.
Yeah, and he also changed his strategy after that and started following Munger more than Buffett actually. So he did change since the Dando investor, and I've also, spoken about that. If you want to know more about what we're talking about here, how to study a business, go back to episode 8 in the podcast where we have I think it's a 5-part series about how to invest like Warren Buffett. And if you're a new listener, definitely go back and listen to some of those episodes to get some more information about what you should do. So Michelle, we talked about that you can check the filings on the SEC's website. But for me personally, that's not my first source. It's definitely a source I will visit, but I have another website I think is a bit more easier than the SEC's website that I usually visit first. My favorite is Dataroma. There's a couple of different websites out there. Guru Focus has it, wellwisdom.com. My favorite is called Dataroma, and it's because it's primarily Warren Buffett style investors that are filed on that website. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, usually I go to Dataroma also because it's just convenient and it's kind of there in a very easy to see way. Like other sites make it slightly more complex to look at. So it's yeah, that's a good one, I think. And if you want to double check things, because sometimes things are not super clear or obvious, because there could be different versions of stocks, or if there was a stock split, and let's say there's a legacy holding that has the original ticker symbol name, but then there's a new ticker symbol for a stock that spun out of it. Like, if you need to dig into things like this further, it's always good to also check with the source materials, just as a way to confirm. Like, you don't want to just easily trust what any of these third-party sites are putting out there, because they could also be wrong, but you want to double check on the source of the official 13F filing that you can find on the SEC Edgar site. So I know it's not as nice to look at, and you may need to, use things like Excel or an XML file reader to open up some of those kinds of reports, but it can help just to be absolutely sure. And also, I meant to finish my other point earlier that I forgot to say. I only bought one Taiwan Semiconductor share because it was my way to get a little bit of skin in the game, to start learning about it, kind of similar to how Danielle Town has her practice shares, or Phil Town also might buy like one share just so he cares and then can study it more. And that's what I like to do, is like, it made me want to study it more. But then the more I was like trying to learn about it, the more I was like, this is really a lot to learn. So I felt unsure about it. So I sold that one share just because I was like, I don't know if I want to proceed. And that ended up being a lucky instinct, because I could not have known that Berkshire was going to sell out of Taiwan Semi. It was just a hunch. And then lo and behold, in looking at more 13F filings, both Monish Pabrai and Li Lu reduced in their Micron holding. So that's another semiconductor. But not to say that they're selling completely out of Micron, but just think about these patterns that you see across many investors. Of, you see them doing certain moves, and why are they doing the same thing, both either selling out or reducing their ownership stakes in certain industries and stocks. So there's definitely ways that you can learn from these really great investors of some of the moves if you study the patterns across and form your own conclusions.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely agree. One thing that's important to note, since I'm also representing Europe here, is that what we've talked about is managers that have American stocks under management. For European stocks, Asian stocks, they actually don't have to report that in the filings. It is only American stocks. The way to find out what some of these investors are buying outside of the United States, well, some of them publish their holdings in their newsletters or in their annual reports. So that's probably the best way to find information like that. I know Guy Spier publishes his company, Aquamarine Fund. He publishes their annual report in the newsletter, and he's done that for a couple of years, which is absolutely great. And I don't know if you saw the other day, but Warren Buffett actually complimented Guy Spier on a great annual report and the way that Guy had written that report. So big congratulations to Guy Spier for that. But yeah, if you want to find any holdings outside of the US, you really have to do some digging because there's no source for that. If you're a web developer and know how to find that information, we would love a website like that. Let me just put it out there.
Yeah. Well, and there's like sort of pieces of that out there. Like there's this one site that I think there's some that are free and some parts that you have to pay for, called TIKR, Ticker. And on that, for example, I think, say, maybe looking at Monish Pabrai's holdings to some extent might be accessible. Like, for example, say a Japanese stock that Monish owns, that ticker site is able to source it from somewhere like Japan 5%. I don't know what that means, but they were able to find that he has some Japanese stock holding, but that would not show up in his 13F filing. And it also showed some Indian stocks as well that they may have sourced from Monish Pabrai's shareholder report that I may not have seen. So sometimes they can find them, but as far as I know, it's not like there's some universal place that shows and reveals what all of these super investors are truly invested in internationally, because they're only legally required to report the American publicly listed shares. So with those, I mean, it's a little bit tricky, but yeah, like Signe said, sometimes you find out about it from publications, or if these investors discuss their holdings on an interview or whatever. But it would be nice if Europe had something like what the SEC requires in mandating its maybe, European funds to disclose what are the equity positions that these funds hold. Like that would be super helpful, I would think. And maybe that will eventually come around, but maybe it's not easy to pull something like that off, because at least with the US it's one country, but with Europe it's a bunch of different countries, right? So it's kind of harder to make everybody agree to, a certain way that this knowledge could come to the fore. But it would be helpful. Like I wish we knew, more about what some European or Asian stocks or African stocks that maybe all kinds of investors could be in, because there's definitely probably some promising equity positions out there, but you have to be kind of like attuned to that. So one, maybe you're not inherently interested in foreign stocks, but some people have talked about, like including Ray Dalio and Jeremy Grantham, how there is opportunity in emerging market stocks. So even though you can't know always if a super investor is invested in some emerging market stocks, but if you care about some of those countries that maybe they're in, you could have really great investment opportunities, even better than what we have available right now in the US. So it's definitely helpful to try to keep your eyes peeled in case you come across opportunities like that.
Yeah, and we know for sure that some investors like Monish and Buffett and other investors are in, for example, Turkey, China, India, and Japan. But what exactly they have in those countries, we don't know. There's no transparency into that. But sometimes we do hear some of these super investors talk about what they own in other regions without necessarily disclosing information about which companies it is. We're coming to an end of the episode. Do you have anything towards the end here that you want to share, Michelle?
I think we covered it pretty well. So if we haven't already made it clear, we gave you so many reasons as to why you should care about what stocks super investors own, because they kind of know what they're doing. A lot of them have very successful track records. And even if it's not entirely guaranteed, it can be something that gives you a lot of food for thought. It's not to say you should invest in what some super investors are invested in, but at least it will help you become a better investor just by learning about it and trying to work your way backwards. Like, take a stock like, oh, why did Berkshire Hathaway invest in Hewlett Packard, a maker of PCs and printers? Is there something there? Why is this, kind of sleepy computer company interesting? Why is it a really
Yeah.
good investment right now that Berkshire did? So to me, that's a new puzzle to try to figure out. And so even if I don't ultimately buy into HPs, I like them. I've always liked HP computers, and maybe something that's been sitting in front of me literally most of my life, this computer that I'm staring into right now, maybe I should think about it. What if I invested in you computer, Hewlett Packard, who knows? And there's different tickers apparently. So things like that, don't just immediately buy the first HP ticker symbol you see, because I just learned, oh, there's two of them. So why did Berkshire invest in HPQ, not the other HP ticker symbol? And why did Monish Pabrai stick with Brookfield Corporation BN ticker symbol instead of BAM, the original Brookfield Asset Management? He sold out of BAM entirely. So all these puzzle pieces, like, is very fascinating to learn, even if you don't invest in it yourself. So I hope that Signe and I gave you lots to think about. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us on our social media handle. We're happy to try to help people figure things out and share as much as we can from our own learning. And we're not giving anybody advice to buy any stocks or subscribe to any internet sources of things. Like, even though you could pay for things, you really don't have to. So I like to go about my investing learning in as free of way as possible.
Mhm.
So just keep that all in mind too.
Great. Well, with that, it's the end of the episode. We hope you found some stocks for your wish list and your wish list only. We will be back on Tuesday.
Till next time.
If you enjoyed the show and found the content informational, we would be super grateful if you would leave us a review and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you automatically get new episodes in your feed. We publish a new show every Tuesday.
The contents of the Investing Mastermind podcast are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this is investing advice, and if you need help in your personal situation, please consult with a professional.